back to your research.
Mm-hmm.
You've done the research, you're doing the research on the genetic mutations in roots, but you're also doing research on beans.
Right.
To me, this is also really fascinating because beans are a basic staple for cultures all over the world, not just, as a Mexican. It's not just something in my culture.
Right.
But they eat beans in England, they eat beans in Africa, they eat beans in Asia. Talk about your research in beans.
Well, with beans, you have to remember approximately 600 million people depend on beans for their basic nutritional needs. Mm-hmm. So not only do you have bean is important as a foodstuff because of its proteins. Mm-hmm. It has carbohydrates and also has minerals that are important for us, and also some cofactors that are important in development of humans. So, there's this paradox of poverty paradox. So Mexican American women, because of their levels of poverty, should have, if poverty were the main definition, should have more kids with spina bifida because of their lack of nutrition. But it turns out that because beans have folate in them, and it's one of the cofactors for making DNA, which is what's lacking in this process, we're protected. So there's a paradox because you'd expect more spina bifida because it was seen as a poverty thing, but it has to do more with nutrition.
Wow.
And also that Latinas are honored as pregnant ladies. They're not shamed, I think, in general. It's seen as an honorable thing to have children. It doesn't mean you have to have children, but it means it's an honorable thing, so you're held in esteem. Mm-hmm. I think that also sort of changes the attitude of the woman towards the fetus.
But go back to our beans.
Beans. Okay, so beans are a very good source of nutrition, but they are a little bit lacking in an important essential amino acid. Mm. Essential amino acids are amino acids that we can't make.
Yeah.
So we have to ingest them. And so what we're trying to do is make better beans that have a little more methionine in them, which is what's lacking. Mm-hmm. That's why you eat beans and rice.
Ah.
So beans are low in methionine, but rice is higher in methionine. So they complement each other. Uh-huh. On the other hand, rice is low in lysine, and beans are higher in lysine. So there's two complementary amino acids that these food combinations make. And everybody knows how to eat a bean, a pulse, as they're called, a pulse and a grain. Uh-huh. And that's how they work.
God, you think back all through history, beans and rice are always paired.
Yeah, or beans and some kind of grain. Grain.
Yeah. And what are you trying? I mean, what are you doing in your lab?
Well, what we're trying to do is we're trying to add methionine into this one protein that's stored at pretty high concentrations in the bean seed itself, and we're trying to do two things to it. Mm-hmm. The first thing is trying to increase the methionine by targeting specific sites to convert this other amino acid called isoleucine to methionine. It's just one simple change, one simple base pair. But the other thing we're trying to do is we're trying to decrease the anti-nutritional qualities of the same protein. So the protein that we're working on as a plant is phytohemagglutinin. Okay. PHA. It's a lectin, and so lectins exist all over, but they bind carbohydrates. Uh-huh. Okay, they bind carbohydrates, and that's great for the plant. If it's a caterpillar or something munches on a bean seed, it's not cooked, and this lectin can then coat the surfaces of their digestive systems and block the uptake of the nutrients that they just ingested. And so they get weak and they can, die.
It's a way of protecting itself.
It's a way for that's right, exactly. However, if if you are in a place where beans, where energy is difficult to get, in other words, if you're in somewhere where you use wood to burn, to cook things, you may not cook the beans all the way through, and then you could cause there's anti-nutritional qualities to affect you. So, or your kids. Actually, this is a common thing in Africa. Where moms put the beans on in the morning, and the kids are hungry in the middle of the day, and they will maybe stir them up and they're trying to take from the bottom of the pot, but it's not always completely from the bottom of the pot. So you can cause a little bit of malnourishment.
Even though they have beans, because they're not cooked all the way yet.
Yeah.
And it's the beans' protective makeup inhibits your ability to take all the nutrition out of what you've just eaten.
Exactly. So we would like to be able to attenuate, to get rid of some of those binding molecules. It's a carbohydrate that binds carbohydrates. Okay, so it's like a protein, and it has like a little carbohydrate pair that goes, cooks onto something that it recognizes. Okay, and so we want to be able to do that, because if you have a diverse diet like we do, then eating slightly raw beans every now and then is not going to really kill you, right? Because you have other stuff. But if you're really dependent for the majority of your nutrients and calories from beans, then you're in trouble.
And we are watching, it's just started, but the impact of climate change on agriculture all over the world is shifting what used to be abundantly rich in water and rich farming lands are becoming dry as our water consumption takes, we arbitrarily or manually directed water to land that didn't have water before. And now that water is becoming scarce, we have to make a decision between the land or the humans who get to consume the water. And if that land goes barren and they have to change the agriculture there, that's the abundance, it's disappearing.
Yes. And also, it's not just the abundance, it's also the quality of the water.
Yeah.
There's some areas of the Colorado that are pretty polluted because they gets used over and over again in different kinds of industries, and then you get these salts or biologicals that are really toxic in the water, and people consume it.
And it's also the plants are consuming it as well.
Right, exactly. But the plants are recycling it better than we do. We are pretty wasteful. Plants can be wasteful too, but it's not their intent. But I think that we consume a lot of water in our agricultural processes or food processes, which is difficult. And also, we waste a lot of food. About a third of our crops get buried because food isn't perfect, or it just doesn't get refrigerated on time, or there aren't enough farm workers at a particular time in a particular place where something needs to be harvested. All of those things cause it's energy, because it takes a lot of energy to grow crops the way we grow crops. And then if you have the crop, it has to be processed in some fashion. Usually, if it's fresh, well, it's just cleaned off a bit and watered, cleaned up with that. But then if it's processed, then you have to. It's a lot of water being used and more energy being used to make those Doritos or whatever you want to call, But yeah.
But legumes, beans are pretty tough plants.
Yes, they are. Except they don't like to freeze. They don't like cold weather.
Yeah.
They like moderate temperatures. They don't like it really hot. They don't like it really cold. They're Goldilocks, just right.
But they can grow all over the place.
They grow all over the place. So different varieties grow in different places.
Yeah.
And so there is resistance, but also there's a growth period. So some plants, some varieties that grow further north, they have a shorter growing period from seed to seed. And further south, it might be a little bit longer.
But they're hardier than a lot of other plants that we've become, as we've progressed, more dependent upon, and therefore I can see that they grow in those parts of the world where food might be otherwise scarce.
Yeah, they're relatively hardy, but they are really sensitive to cold in general.
Mm-hmm.
So, but like I said, there are different types of beans.
Yeah.
So some beans grow up really high altitude, so it gets cold, but it doesn't freeze completely. So those are tropical beans, things like that. And we have selected, not using not using biological engineering to make new beans, but lots of beans have been selected for their hardiness by just farmers. Just this bean plant worked really well, and it suffered the cold, and look at that, it's still produced. So the farmers will save those seeds, and then plant them the next year, and then plant them again the next year, selecting, and so that is typical. The way that agriculture has worked in the past is by selecting by farmers or by agriculturalists for the qualities that they wanted.
And beans are a universal food in a strange way, so that they're always something you can eat somewhere.
Yeah. You can store them. You can store them dry, as long as you keep the rodents and the little bugs off them. They're bean beetles. They're perfectly good. They last for a long time. Yeah.
It's a way of feeding a large population without a lot of energy expended or water expended.
I think I don't know how. I grow them. When we grow them in pots, we water them a lot, and we just take really good care of them, because we're not growing a whole field of them. We're growing just a few, 20, 30 plants at a time, something like that. And then, it is a nice hardy crop. Because you can, as I said, there are different varieties, and they can grow in different places.
Are they a food plant that may be something we will become more reliant upon as climate change impacts what is available and what happens to the soil?
Well, the good thing about beans is that they can actually enrich the soil, because they establish a symbiosis with these rhizobia bacteria that will make that under nitrogen stress, when there isn't enough nitrogen in the soil, these bacteria and the legume form these nodules, and in those nodules they fix nitrogen. So our air is like 70-something% nitrogen, but plants can't use the nitrogen in the air. It's inert. So these bacteria modify the nitrogen so that it can be used by the plant.
So we might be able to restore land slowly by planting.
Yeah, that's a common practice in the Midwest, where you put alfalfa. It's a legume plant, so they plant alfalfa on the off years. And so they can, it's called green fertilizer. And so these alfalfa will make these nodules with these rhizobia that are in the atmosphere. And then you will have a nitrogen-enriched soil when you cut the tops off and maybe just turn it over or not.
I'm getting a whole new appreciation for beans.
Yeah, legumes are really, really cool. They do that. Those interactions are really very important.
My God, they're the most. I'm now going to look at bean reports so much differently, in the sense of we need to take care of that plant.
Yeah. We need to think more carefully about our agricultural systems, because right now the United States is very productive. If our farmers weren't as productive as they are, we'd all be working in the fields, right? Because somebody's got to produce that food. But we need to think about systems that are not so such energy hogs, because the diesel, the trucks, the transport, all of that stuff is very expensive in our agricultural system. Also, planting in monocultures. Planting in monocultures can cause catastrophic problems if a disease hits the plant, or that variety, and you have a lot of it planted, they're all going to go down.
Yeah.
And so that's a problem.
I think about small farmers who use diversity because they're constantly, but if you're a big, giant corporate farmer and you're making millions off of this particular crop, you may not be as your haul as a whole may not be as diverse because you see the short-term monetary benefits or gains from, as you said, monoculture.
Yeah, and so one of the problems with we have an industrial agricultural system, and the problem is that the farmers are the people who take the biggest risks because they agree to plant X amount of seed for company X, the larger ones. But if the crop fails, it's not the agribusiness that takes it, it's the farmer. So we have to protect the farmer. We also don't want to have a glut of any of products, because if you have a glut, then it drives down the market, drives down the prices, and then the farmers will starve and they'll sell their farmland to
a developer.
Exactly, because they can't afford it. Yeah. So it's really complex. It's a complex and textured kind of let me think environment for farming. It's not just you plant it, you grow it, you eat it. It's more like somebody sells you the seed, you plant the seed, you pay for the seed, and you hope it grows something, but they're not going to guarantee it.
But they're not the one taking. The person who asked them to plant the seed isn't the one taking the risk. It's the poor farmer.
That's it. The farmer is planting the seed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The agribusiness is not taking the risk. Not really. Not in comparison with the farmer.
Wow. When you talk to your students, those who are helping you with your research, because this is CSUN, which means undergraduate and graduate students are helping you with your research, do they truly appreciate that delicate balance for those poor farmers?
I think some of them don't, but some of them do. They get activated and they try to figure out how we're going to make a difference. Yeah, and I know that a lot of folks in like the plant biology world are really interested in that. They're trying to figure out how can we farm sustainably, and right now, we put in so much energy into our farming because of, as I said, the gasoline, the trucks, the movement of stuff, and also fertilizer.
Yeah.
Fertilizer is really expensive to make because chemically, it's very expensive. And so we have to find a way to decrease those kinds of costs because as energy gets more expensive, then we'll have to think about how much will the market bear to grow certain crops. Can you do it sustainably? Right now, we're not in a really sustainable system.
Yeah, and part of your work is trying to counterbalance that,
a little bit. Yeah,
with the roots in particular.
Right. Exactly.
If you could make those roots more industrious, so to speak, it makes the plant hardier and may make it last longer or be more productive.
Yeah, exactly. You can do that. You can think about that in those terms. But I'm really interested in general how plants grow and how they regulate that development, because it's very we can say it, but we can't really manipulate it as well as we'd like to be able to manipulate it. Yeah, so I'm into that part of it. Just trying to figure out, okay, if I mess this up, what happens here?
You get to mess up. That's cool.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, and one of the things about science that people forget is that We're always trying to break the system to understand the system. Can we rebuild it? Can we make it better? Scientists are, in my opinion, optimistic. Because if they weren't, they would just bag it all. Because it's just like, oh, gosh. But we have to think that there's a solution. We have to honestly believe that there is a solution that we can approach in a reasonable fashion.
You're a plant biologist, and so many of your students are Latino, and many of them come from migrant families. Do you ever think about that weird juxtaposition? We used to pick these plants. My family put food on the table by harvesting. And now I am studying those plants, not specifically.
Right.
Do you ever think about that relationship?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. My dad actually at one point took us, so we had neighbors across the street who would go for la pizca. They were from Mexico, and they were the age of my older brothers and sisters. So they were talking about how wonderful it was, and this is all that. And my dad had stopped being a farm laborer, and so he took us on vacation, and he took us on vacation to Sequoia. But first, before we went to Sequoia, we went to a farm labor camp, and he hired us out as a family to pick grapes in the hot sun, like right about now.
My mom used to say grapes were mean.
They are mean. And so everybody, including me, got a curved knife to cut las manos, the grape. What is that? What do you say that? How do you say that in English?
The bunches?
The bunches, yes. The bunches, the big bunches, and they're pretty heavy.
Yes.
And you lay them down in these boxes. And then when the boss, the overseer said, oh, that's all we need for today, that was it. It didn't matter if you had 20 boxes or whatever. Anyway, so we did that for a couple days. It was okay. It was fun work, actually, because I ate more grapes probably than I actually put in the box. But
your livelihood wasn't dependent upon it.
No, it wasn't dependent on it. Absolutely not. And so then after that, we went to Sequoia. And then that's where my dad told us, he said, there are lots of the people that you were working with a couple days ago or yesterday probably don't even know that this is available to them. So you should take advantage of what's available to you. And it convinced my older brothers and sisters that maybe the pisca wasn't all that great.
Yeah. Since my mom was the one doing all of that, I can tell you she never romanticized.
Yeah. These kids, they were kids, they were teenagers, and they were just like, oh, yeah, you've got to party with these people, and they're all from all over the country, blah, blah. So, that was true. But, my mom, when we got into the farm labor camp, they had little houses. And of course, my mother being my mother, she disinfected everything. Every surface was cleaned. It reeked of Hexol and bleach. Beds, everything that was available to us in that little house was cleaned. Yeah.
Yeah. Nope. I've never romanticized.
No, I think it's such hard work. So, when people buy things, you have to really think about how hot it was for somebody to get this to you so you could eat it. And so enjoy it. But be aware that someone worked hard to get that.
And now you're doing work. Because in those communities, in the migrant camps, beans is a staple.
Yeah.
It's oftentimes the only thing on the stove besides some tortillas.
Right.
And you're now trying to make that staple more nutritional. But that's true whether you're Mexicano and you're following the crops, the Latino following the crops in California or Texas or wherever, or you're trying to survive in somewhere in Africa.
Right. Or somewhere in Latin America.
Yeah. Or even parts of South Asia.
Right. Yep. Exactly. So, I mean, I think it's for me, it's interesting work. I mean, intellectual curiosity is part of my driver, but also it has potential of being useful. And I know people talk about having useful projects. I don't really think that way. Mm-hmm. I think if you follow your curiosity, you're going to come up with something interesting, and if somebody can use it, that's really great. You know, if I can figure out how to make a better bean plant and how to make better bean seeds, then that's great. But I won't be there. I'm not the person to market it. I would never put myself in that position. But, you know, I think it's for others to use. You know, knowledge is, my dad was trying to explain to my grandfather one day he said, why do you have to study so much? And what are you doing exactly? This is my grandfather. My dad, we were at dinner, at the dinner table, and I looked at my dad, and my dad looked at me, and with the "I'll take care of this one" look, and I said, "Okay." So he told his dad that knowledge was money in the bank. You don't know when you're going to use it, but it's important to save and to have it stashed, so when you do need it, or if you do need it, it's available to you for whatever your needs might be.
And no one can rob that bank.
No one can rob that bank. Yeah.
What is it like? You're a Latina teaching at an HSI. And when you started out here, it wasn't an HSI.
Nope.
What is it like to be that role model?
Oh, I never quite see myself as a role model. I mean, people say that, but I think I'm just me. And so I'm flawed, just like everybody else. So I don't want everybody to say, oh, this is a great role model. For certain things, I'm fine. And other things, I sit there and think, you have to make your own path. Mm-hmm. And you just have to choose and ATM, a todo madre. You know, get all you got.
But at the same time, you have lived experiences that give you a perspective into the lives of your students,
right,
that some of your colleagues will never, as much as they try, aren't just going to get. It's just,
yeah, it's not. It's true. That is true. And so one of the things that I try to always remember is that everybody's experience is different, and just because you're Latino doesn't mean that you had my experience or any, you could have been from a very prosperous family and just immigrated. Half of my family was that way. Half of my mother's grandparents were that way. So some of them were very indigenous, and then the other parts were not. Mm-hmm. And so you can't make assumptions about people, period. You just learn about them, and then you can make your own decision about them. But you can't decide, well, they're so-and-so, and they look like this, so they must be that,
What is it like, and I have to add, it's a strange question, but I think about, because what you're doing is you have this intellectual curiosity, which I love. I mean, that's one of the reasons I do it. I get to talk to people like you, and that's not botany. Well, actually, I do have a little bit of a background because my great-grandfather was a horticulturalist. But other than that, I get to learn something new. Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to be looking at plants for the next few months and just thinking with them, they can talk to one.
That's right, they can.
But at the same time, I'm curious to know, what is it like to be the only? Sometimes you're the only brown person. Sometimes you're the only woman. Sometimes you're the only woman of color in the room, because we're talking about science. And then we're talking about that narrower field of biology. And now we're talking about plant biology. Again, it gets very homogeneous.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm the raisin in the rice pudding.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's maybe a little strange, but since I've often been that, it doesn't strike me as weird.
Because that's the only reality you know.
That's the reality I've known.
Yeah.
And so, like, even when I was in school, so I was, in the olden days, people were tracked. And so I was always tracked in the Gold Star track, okay?
Or the gifted track.
The gifted track. But it wasn't called gifted. It was just like the people who could read and obeyed rules were sort of put in classrooms where you had a little more freedom and did a lot more creative stuff because you could whip through your math and your English pretty quickly. So, and your reading, and so then you got to do other things once you took care of business. And I think that was an important lesson that you can it may not always be fun, but you take care of business and then you move on to something else that might help you reinforce things. So I remember being in, I don't know if it was 6th or 7th grade, we had to plan a trip to Hawaii. And the idea was to learn about an island. So we learned geography, and we also learned cost of, like, do you fly there or do you take a boat? And what kind of tours do you want to take? And so we had to gather a lot of information about Hawaii and then write a little report about what we would do. And then we did murals on the walls. It was wonderful. But that's because we could all read well enough and we could all do the math well enough so that we could complete those assignments. So there were basic skills, and then you applied them. We had a garden when I was in my grammar school. Only K through 3 had a garden. And what did you learn by gardening? You learned you found out how to take 2 inches without requiring a ruler. So you got something you could measure and you could use it as a model and then put seeds in those areas. And you could figure out how many seeds you needed in order to do a row that was 4 feet versus 8 feet. And so it was math, yes, but it was also very applied. So it was useful. Instead of just adding weird numbers together to get some number, right? It was more than that.
I have a dumb question. How does it feel now? You've been in your career for 40 years. When you go into conferences like you did a couple weeks ago, you're not the only anymore.
Nope, it's great. I have friends who look like me, and also friends who don't look like me, and we're all friends because we're all seeking a truth, trying to understand plants better. And I think as I said, I was aware that I was often the only, but since that was sort of typical for me, I didn't feel out of place. I have an ego or something. I don't know what it is. But it really, I was there, so I must have belonged there because I was there. If I didn't belong there, I wouldn't be there. It's a very strange logic, but, it was sort of like that. And, my parents suffered significant racism when they were growing up. And so, the town I was raised in had very, very severe covenants and laws of where we could live or we could buy and things like that. So there were rules. Some of them were unspoken. That I could read temperatures pretty quickly. Yeah.
But you have been in your career as an academic. You've been a professor. So some of those people were your students that you're now in the room with. How does that feel?
Well, that's great. I think it's the most wonderful thing to see someone move on and get their degrees and do what they want to do. They may not be professors, but they're doing what they want to do. And that's what's important. That's the one thing that education gives you. It gives you the freedom to choose. So you can be, you could work in student services, you can work in administration, join the dark side, as we call it, or you can be a professor. There's one student who earned their PhD, and then they decided they really didn't want to work with adults, and they've turned out to be a magnificent middle school science teacher, and they're the resource in their institution. the science resource person as well as teaching science. And that just suits her. It's just, yeah. And I think that's really good for her to be able to say, no, I got the PhD, but, I think I want to use it in a different way. And so she's providing really strong science development skills for the students she works with, which is great.